20 years. 2 decades of building, innovating, and delivering results that had taken Morrison Digital Marketing from a struggling startup to the most respected digital agency in the Pacific Northwest. 20 years of 14-hour days, weekend strategy sessions, and the kind of hands-on leadership that had earned me a reputation as someone who could turn any campaign into gold. My name is Catherine Moore, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the creative director and VP of strategy at Morrison Digital. I had built the creative department from a team of 3 junior designers into a 47-person powerhouse that had won more industry awards than any other agency in the region. I had led campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, launched products that generated hundreds of millions in revenue, and mentored dozens of young professionals who had gone on to successful careers throughout the industry. My team's work had been featured in every major marketing publication, and I had been invited to speak at conferences around the world. At 52 years old, I was at the peak of my professional abilities. I understood consumer psychology better than ever, had 20 years of experience to draw from when developing strategies, and had built relationships with clients that generated millions in annual revenue for the agency. But according to Marcus Morrison, the CEO and founder of Morrison Digital, I was too old to lead in today's market. Have you ever been told you're too old for something, despite having years of proven success? That moment when someone half your age gets the promotion you deserved, not because they're more qualified, but because they look the part. I want to know, has ageism ever cost you an opportunity you'd earned? Drop a comment and tell me your story, because what happened to me next will probably sound familiar to many of you. The conversation that ended my career at Morrison Digital took place on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus had asked me to meet him in his office to discuss the future direction of the agency. "Catherine, you've been absolutely incredible for this company," Marcus began, using the tone that every experienced professional recognizes as the prelude to bad news. "Your contributions over the past 20 years have been essential to our success." Past tense. Essential to our past success, not our future success. "But Marcus, I'm not going anywhere. My contract doesn't expire for another 2 years, and we're in the middle of planning the biggest campaign launches of the year." "That's what I want to talk about. Catherine, you're fantastic at what you do, but we need someone with fresh ideas. Someone who really understands where digital marketing is heading." Fresh ideas. As if 20 years of consistently successful innovation had somehow made me incapable of adapting to new trends. "Marcus, I've been adapting to changes in this industry since before social media existed. I've led us through every major platform shift, every algorithm change, every new technology that's transformed how we reach consumers. What specifically do you think I'm missing?" It's not about what you're missing exactly. It's about energy, about connection with younger demographics, about having a leader who can authentically represent our brand to the audiences we're trying to reach, authentically represent our brand. Translation: you're too old to be the face of a hip, modern agency. "And who did you have in mind to replace me?" Marcus's face brightened with the enthusiasm of someone who thought he was about to deliver exciting news. "Her name is Madison Brooks. She's 28. She has 3 million followers on Instagram, and she's been consulting for some of the biggest brands in fashion and lifestyle. She really understands how to create content that resonates with Gen Z and younger millennials." Madison Brooks. I knew the name because I had been following her work, not out of admiration, but out of professional curiosity about how someone with no formal marketing education and no agency experience had managed to build such a large following. Madison was undeniably talented at creating visually appealing content for her own personal brand. She had an eye for aesthetics, an understanding of what performed well on social media, and the kind of effortless confidence that came naturally to people who had grown up in front of cameras. But she had never managed a team of professionals. She had never developed integrated marketing strategies for complex B2B clients. She had never had to balance creative vision with business objectives, client expectations, and budget constraints. She was an influencer, not a leader. "Marcus, Madison is talented at creating content for her personal brand, but managing a creative department is completely different from building a social media following. We have pharmaceutical clients, financial services clients, B2B software companies. These aren't lifestyle brands looking for pretty Instagram posts. Catherine, I think you're underestimating her abilities. Madison has worked with major brands. She understands data analytics, and she brings a fresh perspective that our clients are going to love. What about the team? What about the relationships I've built with our major clients? What about the campaigns we have in development? Madison will be able to build her own relationships with the team and clients. And honestly, Catherine, some of our clients have been asking about bringing in younger leadership. They want to work with people who understand their target demographics. Our clients had been asking about younger leadership. I found this hard to believe, considering that our client retention rate was 94% and our average account size had grown by 340% during my tenure as creative director. Which clients specifically have asked about this? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's more of a general sentiment than specific feedback. But Catherine, you have to understand that the industry is changing. Clients want to work with agencies that feel current, that understand the platforms and audiences they're trying to reach. The industry is changing. The oldest excuse in the corporate playbook for ageism and discrimination. Marcus, our results speak for themselves. We've exceeded revenue targets for 7 consecutive years. Our campaigns have won more awards than any other agency in the region. Client satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. What exactly is the problem that needs to be solved? There's no problem, Catherine. You're amazing at what you do. But we need to evolve. And evolution sometimes means making difficult decisions about leadership. As if firing a successful executive because of her age was some kind of strategic necessity rather than blatant discrimination. And when would this transition take place? Madison starts Monday. We'll announce the leadership change at the all-hands meeting on Wednesday, and we'll position it as an exciting evolution of our creative vision. Monday. Marcus was giving me less than a week's notice after 20 years of service. What about my contract? What about severance? What about the projects I'm currently leading? Our legal team will be in touch about the contract details. You'll receive a generous severance package that reflects your contributions to the company. As for current projects, Madison will take over your responsibilities immediately. As if 2 decades of institutional knowledge and client relationships could be transferred overnight. I walked out of Marcus Morrison's office that Tuesday morning with my head spinning. 20 years of loyalty, innovation, and results dismissed because I didn't have enough Instagram followers and couldn't authentically represent the brand to younger demographics. But I wasn't just angry. I was curious about how long it would take for Marcus to realize that managing a creative team required skills that couldn't be learned from social media tutorials. Madison Brooks started the following Monday, and I learned about her first week from colleagues who were still speaking to me. The official story was that I had decided to pursue new opportunities, but everyone in the industry knew that successful creative directors don't suddenly leave thriving agencies without explanation. Madison's first team meeting was apparently spent introducing herself and discussing her vision for revolutionizing our creative approach. She talked about authentic storytelling, leveraging micro-influencer partnerships, and creating thumb-stopping content that drives engagement. She also spent 20 minutes taking photos around the office for her Instagram story, documenting her first day as creative director at the most innovative agency in the PNU. Her first client presentation was for Henderson Financial Services, a conservative wealth management firm that had been our client for 8 years. The campaign I had been developing for them was a sophisticated, data-driven approach to reaching high-net-worth individuals approaching retirement. Madison scrapped my strategy and proposed a TikTok-heavy campaign featuring young influencers talking about making money moves and securing the bag. When the client expressed confusion about how this approach would reach their target demographic of affluent 50-somethings, Madison explained that financial services needed to stop being so stuffy and connect with where culture is headed. Henderson Financial Services terminated their contract the next day. By the end of Madison's first week, I had received calls from 3 of my former team members. Sarah Chen, my senior art director, had given her notice. Mike Rodriguez, our lead strategist, was actively interviewing with competitors. Jenny Kim, our project manager, was so frustrated with the chaos that she was considering leaving the industry entirely. Catherine, it's a disaster, Sarah told me during our coffee meeting. Madison doesn't understand our processes, our client needs, or how to manage complex campaigns. She keeps talking about disrupting everything without understanding why our current systems work. What specifically is going wrong? She scrapped the Morrison Auto campaign we've been working on for 3 months and wants to start over with something she calls car content that doesn't suck. She told the team at Johnson & Partners that their branding was giving very 2015 energy and needed to be completely reimagined. And yesterday, she spent 2 hours in a strategy meeting talking about her personal brand partnerships instead of discussing our current projects. This was exactly what I had predicted, but hearing about it still made me angry. Not just because my work was being undone, but because my team was suffering the consequences of Marcus's short-sighted decision. The call I had been expecting came 3 weeks after my termination, at 6:14 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Catherine, thank God you answered. This is Marcus. We have a situation. Marcus Morrison, calling me before sunrise. This couldn't be good. What kind of situation, Marcus? Everything is falling apart. We've lost Henderson Financial. Morrison Auto is threatening to leave. 3 of our best people have quit. And the team is, well, they're struggling with the transition. I'm sorry to hear that. What does this have to do with me? Catherine, I made a mistake. I realize now that replacing you was premature. Madison is talented, but she doesn't have the experience to manage our client portfolio or lead a team of this size. Premature. As if the problem was timing rather than the fundamental stupidity of firing a successful executive because of her age. What are you asking me, Marcus? I'm asking if you would consider coming back. Not in your old role exactly, but as a senior consultant to help stabilize the department and mentor Madison through the transition, coming back to mentor the person who had replaced me. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus, you fired me 3 weeks ago because you said I was too old to lead in today's market. What's changed? Catherine, I realize I made an error in judgment. Your experience and leadership are essential to our success. I was too focused on optics and demographics and not focused enough on results and stability. An error in judgment. Not age discrimination, not poor decision-making, just a simple error in judgment. And what would this consulting arrangement look like? We would bring you back as a senior creative consultant, working part-time to help with our major accounts and team development. You would have significant autonomy and a very competitive compensation package. I thought about this for a moment, not because I was eager to return to Morrison Digital, but because I was curious about how desperate Marcus had become. What kind of compensation package? We're prepared to offer $150 an hour for consulting services, with a minimum commitment of 20 hours per week. I did the math quickly. $150 an hour for 20 hours per week was $3,000 per week, or roughly $150,000 per year for part-time work. My former full-time salary had been $135,000. Marcus, that's an interesting offer, but my consulting rate for emergency turnaround situations is $200 per hour with a minimum 25-hour weekly commitment. There was silence on the other end of the line. $200 an hour. Catherine, that's significantly more than your previous salary. Marcus, my previous salary was for full-time employment with benefits and job security. Emergency consulting during a crisis situation is a different service entirely, and it's priced accordingly. What would the scope of work include? I would take over management of our major accounts, provide strategic oversight for all campaigns, and work with the team to rebuild our operational processes. Madison could focus on newer clients and social media campaigns where her skills are better suited. And you would be willing to work with Madison? I would be willing to work with anyone who's committed to delivering excellent results for our clients. But Marcus, I want to be clear about something. I'm not coming back to fix the problems you created and then be discarded again when things stabilize. Catherine, I give you my word that this arrangement would be long-term and stable. Your word, the same word that had promised me job security 3 weeks earlier. Marcus, I'll need a formal consulting contract with specific terms and performance metrics. I'm not doing this on a handshake. We negotiated a 6-month consulting agreement with the option to extend based on performance. The terms were favorable: $200 per hour for a minimum of 25 hours per week, complete autonomy over strategic decisions for major accounts, and the authority to rebuild operational processes without interference. I returned to Morrison Digital the following Monday, not as an employee, but as an independent consultant with the power to make the changes I had been advocating for years. The office felt different when I walked in. The energy was subdued, tense in a way it had never been during my tenure as creative director. The team that had once been confident and collaborative now seemed stressed and uncertain. Madison was in my old office, which had been redecorated with ring lights, a professional camera setup, and inspirational quotes about creating content that converts. She was filming what appeared to be a morning routine video when I arrived. "Catherine, oh my God. Hi, Marcus told me you were coming back to help out. This is so exciting." Madison was genuinely enthusiastic, which made the situation more complicated than I had expected. I had been prepared to deal with someone who was defensive or territorial, not someone who seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Hi, Madison. I'm looking forward to working with you and the team to get things back on track. Yes, I have so many ideas about how we can collaborate. I've been thinking about ways to bring more authentic storytelling into our client work, and I know you have amazing experience with strategy and client relationships." Over the next few days, I began to understand what had gone wrong during my absence. Madison was talented and creative, but she had been thrown into a leadership role she wasn't prepared for. She had been trying to apply influencer marketing tactics to complex B2B clients, and she had been overwhelmed by the operational aspects of managing a large team. More importantly, she had been set up to fail by Marcus, who had given her no transition period, no mentorship, and no realistic expectations about the challenges she would face. I spent my first week rebuilding relationships with clients who were considering leaving, stabilizing projects that had been disrupted during the transition, and working with the team to restore the collaborative culture that had made Morrison Digital successful. I also spent time working with Madison to identify where her skills could be most valuable. She was excellent at creating engaging content for lifestyle and fashion brands, and she had insights about social media platforms that were genuinely helpful for reaching younger demographics. But she wasn't a strategic leader, and she wasn't equipped to manage complex client relationships or oversee large-scale campaigns. Within a month, we had established a working arrangement where I handled strategic oversight and major client relationships while Madison focused on content creation and social media strategy. The team responded positively to having clear leadership and defined roles, and our client retention improved dramatically. Most importantly, I was working fewer hours than I had as a full-time employee while earning significantly more money. The consulting arrangement gave me flexibility and autonomy that I had never had as an employee, and it allowed me to focus on the aspects of the work I enjoyed most. 6 months later, Marcus offered to convert my consulting arrangement into a permanent executive position, but I declined. I had discovered that I preferred the independence and higher compensation of consulting, and I had begun working with other agencies on strategic projects. Madison, meanwhile, had found her niche within the agency and was thriving in a role that played to her strengths rather than forcing her into responsibilities she wasn't prepared for. She continued to create excellent content for our younger skewing clients, and she had developed into a valuable team member under proper mentorship. But the experience had taught me something important about ageism in corporate America. Marcus had made assumptions about my capabilities based on my age, and he had made assumptions about Madison's leadership potential based on her social media following. Both assumptions had been wrong, and both had caused unnecessary chaos and damage to the business. The irony was that the fresh perspective Marcus had thought the agency needed was actually a return to the fundamentals of good marketing: understanding your audience, developing clear strategies, and delivering consistent results. Social media followers and aesthetic sensibilities were valuable skills, but they weren't substitutes for experience, leadership ability, and strategic thinking. But here's what I want to ask you. Put yourself in my position for a moment. You've spent 20 years building a department and delivering consistent results, and then you're told you're too old to lead and replaced by someone with no management experience because she has a large social media following. What would you have done in my place? Would you have fought the termination legally? Would you have accepted the severance and looked for another position? Would you have taken the risk of starting your own consulting practice? Some people have told me I was lucky that Marcus called me back, that I should have been more gracious about the opportunity to return. They say I should have been understanding about the business pressures he was facing and the need to attract younger talent. But here's what I keep coming back to. Marcus made a choice about my value based on my age rather than my performance. He decided that Instagram followers were more important than 20 years of successful leadership. He was willing to sacrifice team stability and client relationships for the sake of appearing trendy and current. And I made a choice about my own value. I chose to price my expertise at market rates rather than accepting whatever he offered. I chose to return on my terms rather than his terms. I chose to prove that experience and competence couldn't be replaced by youth and social media savvy. Do you think that was the right choice? Do you think there's ever a justification for replacing successful older employees with younger workers who have less experience? I'm genuinely curious about how other people would navigate this situation. You know what really bothers me about this whole experience? It's not just that Marcus was wrong about my capabilities. It's that he was so confident that youth and digital nativity were more valuable than experience and leadership skills. He thought social media followers translated to management ability. He discovered they didn't. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Marcus had approached a situation differently. If he had wanted to bring in younger perspectives, he could have hired Madison as a senior specialist rather than replacing me entirely. If he had wanted to modernize our approach, he could have invested in training and development rather than wholesale leadership changes. Instead, he chose the path that looked innovative and disruptive. And he learned exactly what happens when you prioritize optics over competence. If this story resonates with you, if it makes you think about your own experiences with ageism or assumptions about what different generations bring to the workplace, then maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Maybe we all need to be reminded that experience has value, that leadership skills can't be replaced by social media savvy, and that sometimes the most innovative thing you can do is recognize and retain talent regardless of age. What would you have done in my place? How would you have handled being replaced because you were too old to lead despite having 20 years of successful results? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how other people would handle this kind of professional discrimination. Share this if it moved you. And remember that your own story of professional resilience and self-advocacy is still being written. You have more value than you know, and age is an asset, not a liability, when it's combined with competence and results.